Okay, I think we're set and ready to go for the Ask Me Anything live session. I see we have a couple people on, and I'm sure others may join. Let me start by saying thank you. Thank you very much for signing in and joining the session. I actually started doing these a couple months back. It's my way of sharing lessons learned, advice, perspective to help others achieve what they want out of life, professionally, frankly, and personally. So each one of my AMA sessions, I usually put out a topic. But frankly, once we discuss the topic, you're free to ask me anything on any subject. So the chat box is there, and I'll monitor the chat live as we're going through, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you've got. For those that haven't participated before, I'm very straightforward, open and candid. So no questions off bounds. And if I don't want to answer, I'll tell you. But in general, I can't think of a question I've been asked so far that I've not answered in some form or fashion. All right, so let's get started with today's topic. Today's topic is how to manage a bad boss. Now, I picked this topic, frankly, to be a little provocative because yes, we have bad bosses from time to time, but frankly, it's not the norm. The key for all of us is to manage our bosses, whether they're good or quote bad, because frankly, most bosses have good traits and they have bad traits. We're all humans, just like we do, strengths and weaknesses. So the key is really developing a relationship with your boss so that you can figure out the best way to manage them as you're moving forward on your career. So let me start with just a few points here, and I'll talk in a bit of a monologue, and then feel free to ask me questions as we go along. So first, when you think about managing bosses, I talked about the importance of relationship. The key is really understanding what motivates him or her. The way I've always thought about it is from a sales perspective. I started out my career in sales. And I'll tell you, I learned so much about people because you don't get to choose your customers or your prospective customers. So you have to figure out how to work with them, how to develop a relationship with them, how to ultimately get them to buy what it is that you're selling. And frankly, what I've taken from that experience, I've applied to how to manage bosses. I just think of my bosses as my customer. So I don't get to pick necessarily who they are, but let me figure out the best way to develop a relationship. So number one is figuring out what motivates them. Because just like you, everybody's motivated differently. Motivation can come from recognition. Motivation can come from achievement. It can come from creative innovation. There are a lot of things that motivate people. So as we think about this, look at your own boss and figure out what actually motivates them. And then determine how can you actually make them look good. Now, when I say look good, what I mean by that is how do you support them to be successful so that they are seen in positive lights by their boss? Pardon me. Allergies. I'm coming to you from Tampa, Florida. I'm staying with my daughter's family, and everything is in bloom. Okay, so figure out how you make them look good. In essence, try to understand their strengths and their weaknesses. And given their weaknesses, can you actually fill in the gap? Let me give you an example. I had a boss once. He was a really good guy. And he was, what should I say? He did a good job in terms of helping all of us to be successful. But frankly, he wasn't a great leader. Whenever we hit roadblocks or issues, he was not the one that was going to inspire us and help us move forward. So I tend to be a good leader and I'm pretty inspirational. So I actually would fill that void. So if we were all together and something happened and he had a tough time kind of seeing forward versus just focusing on what had happened, I was the one who really tried to rally the team and rally the troops. Pardon me. So it doesn't really matter whether it's your job or not. When you work with the manager, it's a team and you all have different roles to play. So figuring out how to fill in their gaps helps to make you indispensable, which is also a positive thing. Now, if you're in a toxic environment where someone is actually threatening or verbally abusive or whatever that might be, but really toxic, I am not telling you to tough it out. What I'm telling you, in toxic environments, it's actually different. It's really important that you raise the issue. You raise the issue. If you're not comfortable with the boss themselves because of what they're doing, then you go to their boss or you go to HR. You don't just run, because if you just leave, then you're leaving that bad boss and their behavior, their toxic behavior, for other people to deal with. And while they're not necessarily your responsibility, I just personally feel that if you can do things or take actions that will help make it easier on others, then it's important to do that. And if you're planning to leave anyway because of the environment, you really have nothing to lose. And you actually have something to gain, because it may not be known that this is the behavior of this particular person. So it may actually get addressed. And if it's addressed and the company is one that you like and the role is one that you like, then there's no reason for you to leave. So toxic bosses are different. You need to deal with those. But that aside, if they're just other issues, for instance, let me actually, before I pause, let me just check the chat and see if anything's coming through yet. Okay. If there are other issues, like a boss who is erratic, right? I've had bosses that under stress become what I call erratic, meaning they just get flustered. So all of a sudden there's either a lot to do or there's more deliverables that we can possibly create. And instead of just giving it to all of us, right? What he would do is micromanage. He'd be in and out at our desks, in our areas, focusing on, have you done this? Did you do that? Or changing his mind, willy-nilly. It's just erratic. So it made it really hard in a super stressful environment anyway to actually be productive. When that happens, then you need to figure out, all right, how do I actually help my boss? You want to come from a place of respect and support. So one of the ways you can do it is try to bring calm to his erratic behavior or her erratic behavior. Go into the office to say, listen, I know we have a lot to do. It would really help me if we could just spend 10 minutes so I can understand what you are trying to achieve and what we need to get done. And therefore, I can put a strategy in place to get it done and deliver it for you, right? Kind of get it together. And then how often would you like updates to make sure this is together? So take control in a way, but do it in a way in which you are offering a path and a way of getting it done. All right, I have a question that's come in. How about when a boss has low self-confidence? Sometimes they're not necessarily aggressive, but their low self-confidence makes it difficult to communicate. Well, sometimes when somebody has low self-confidence, they actually tend to be, they can be a little paranoid. They can sometimes take it out on you, and that they're afraid to let you shine because it might make them look bad. So it depends on how that comes through. When you say make it difficult to communicate, the best way is to communicate in a way in which you are coming forth as trying to be helpful, not complaining, right? Not criticizing, but helpful. So for instance, let's say someone who's, I'm trying to think of an example of someone who has low self-confidence. They have low self-confidence. They may not actually be giving you much opportunity to shine, or they might be taking credit for your work, right? Those things definitely happen. And if that happens, the way to address those is no, don't walk into their office and say, I demand that you give me my credit where credit is due. That's just confrontational. Instead, you go and you try, number one, first to say, I've worked really hard on XYZ. And I just want to make sure that you know that and that I'm happy to be part of this team and be part of what we're all getting done, et cetera. So you kind of make sure that they know what you've done just in case they didn't. And if still after that they're not giving you credit or where credit is due, then when you hear about credit, meaning someone might tell you, oh, say your boss is Susan. Oh, Susan, right, shared the great work that she did for X, Y, and Z. And you know that you actually did the work. Then what you say in response is, oh, I'm so glad that she shared that. We worked really hard together on that, right? So you haven't done anything to be dismissive to her, but you've made sure that your voice and your work is also included. So there are different ways to get that done. But communication in general is really about clarity. So if you're given tasks or assignments or what have you, make sure you ask the questions so that you're clear on what exactly do you want from this deliverable, whether it is length or size or detail or summary, right, etc. What do you want? I fell into that myself. I once was given a project and it was early in my career and I so much wanted to make a good impression. So I worked so hard on this. We were trying to put together all of the different opportunities that existed. Remember, I started out in sales, right? That existed within this particular segment, et cetera. Well, I did this big work. I did this spreadsheet. I had detail. You could click to understand background and what source it came from, right, et cetera. It was hours and hours and hours of work. When I gave it to my boss, his response was, oh, gosh, well, thanks, Shellye. But honestly, all I was looking for was a summary of the leads. He probably would have been happy with about an hour's worth of work. So you have to clarify what they want. Number one, for me, that was a complete waste of energy because I got no credit from it. Since, yeah, just because I worked too hard, he wasn't going to give me credit for that. And if I was spending all the time doing that project, I wasn't spending time on something else that could have taken me forward. So clarify is really important when managing bosses. All right, let me go through a few other things. Um, you know, I talked about understanding what motivates them and what makes, how do you make them look good? Well, let's talk through kind of some of the issues that you have sometimes with bosses. We talked about communications. Well, frankly, I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but I once had a boss that yelled, not all the time, but when he got frustrated, got excited or whatever, got mad, he yelled. Well, that's just not professional. And I don't have to take that. And you don't have to take that either. So if you have bosses that yell, right, the best way to deal with that is actually try to disarm. So the first time it happens, you literally look at them with eyes wide, just incredulous and say, excuse me, but Bill, are you yelling at me? And sometimes just doing that catches them. And because they don't always realize that that's what they do, sometimes it's a trigger with frustration. And in my situation, what I found is when I did that, the answer was, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I just get so frustrated with blah, 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 right? Whatever it might be. But it calmed the behavior. And then if it happened again, I could say it, right? And that way, always just surprise. And then it would calm down. And then you know what? He still yelled at other people, but he didn't yell at me. So there are ways to be respectful and deal with those kinds of things. Okay, next question. Let me read on the chat. In time of crisis, sometimes it is more difficult to be seen. My boss usually relies on people he knows, and it becomes more difficult to get the space to show him my skills. Any tips for that? Yeah, that's a hard one too. One of the keys is to be proactive. This is a challenge that frankly also happens to new members of teams because bosses have worked with others for longer. So they have shorthand in the way they communicate. They know that if they give somebody a project, they're going to know it and get it, and they don't have to spend as much time and energy, right? So one of the ways to be seen and to get engaged is to actually be proactive, which is you reach out to say, hey, I'm either completed this or I've done that or whatever, but I have bandwidth and I have space. What else can I do to be helpful? Or if you hear about an initiative or there's an area that your boss is interested in, you might tell her or him that, hey, I know you're getting ready to start X, Y, and Z. I'd really like to participate, help out, work, support, whatever the right verb is for your skill and what you're doing. So try to be proactive in it's almost like volunteering, but in volunteering to get engaged. The other way you can do it is leverage allies, create allies on your team so that when they get something, they suggest, hey, I'd love to work on this with Farouk, for instance. And then you get pulled in. So either come at it directly or try to develop relationships with peers so they pull you in to some of these different activities. Next one, sometimes it feels that there's favoritism in organizations. People who work hard in the background are often ignored, and those who take the front are more appreciated. How does a boss ensure equal, hang on, how does a boss ensure equity? Yeah. Um, it's this one's hard because you say, how does a boss, you ask from the boss's perspective. Um, Bosses don't always know as much as you think they know. So you, in these cases, you really have to stand up for yourself. So for instance, you're working hard, you're getting things done. Make sure people know about it. Right now, people a lot of times on a call, on whatever, in meetings when we actually could meet with people, folks would say things very simply, like even in greeting, hi, how are you? Right? How's it going? What's happening? Right? All those kinds of very informal ways of greeting. Well, use those informal greetings as invitations because they're usually questions. Hey, how are you doing? I'm doing great. I just finished creating a brand new strategy for blah, 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 blah. What's happening? Oh, I have just spent hours on putting together a new approach for how we do social media. What's going on? Well, you see what I'm saying? Use those questions to actually, no matter who asks them, peers, bosses, other people you interact with. And that way you can start to share broadly the kinds of things that you're doing so you can increase that overall visibility. Next question. How do you build good professional relationships with your manager when he or she does not understand your domain? How much effort should I put in to educating him or her with my domain? Well, if your domain and where you spend your time and effort is the area in which you're going to be excelling and making an impact, then your boss needs to understand it. So you should spend some time. He doesn't have to understand, or she doesn't have to understand all the depths, but at least the way in which it contributes to what their objectives are. Remember, I talked about focusing on making your boss look good? Well, part of that is understanding what are their priorities? What are their objectives for the year? And oh, by the way, I'm not just talking about what's written in their job description or their performance plan, but it's a fair question to ask your boss at the beginning of each year. What are you trying to get accomplished? What are their priorities? Where's the focus? How do you think we can make the biggest impact as a team? And now, armed with that, you can then take the things that you do, and when you communicate what you're doing, do it in terms of those objectives so they can see how you're helping to impact what they're trying to get done. Next one. How to build skip level relationships with your boss's boss in a safe and productive way. I'll be candid. This was a whole lot easier when we were all in buildings and actually ran into people. Now that we're all virtual, that's a little harder. But one of the things that you can do, again, depending upon your company, is number one, start following your boss's boss. And what I mean by that is, let's say I'm making it up because you need examples, but let's say your boss's boss is someone who speaks at conferences periodically, right? Well, make sure you actually take the time to know which conferences they speak at. And many conferences have actually provide, tapings, et cetera, of what's been said and or summaries, or there's recaps, et cetera. And so it's a really simple thing to say, hey, number one, heard you're speaking at such and such, good luck. right? And then after it's done, hey, heard it went well, right? It just gives you a reason to kind of start a conversation. And then you can tag in either a question, ask for help, ask for perspective or advice, something that's quick to kind of start that overall relationship. So, what you want to do, that's just an example, is find out the kinds of things they do, what their interests are, and then how you can actually foster a communication or a relationship in that particular area. The other thing you can do to get started is many companies allow, and very few companies actually prevent if you actually ask for it, but asking for a skip level interview. A skip level interview is not an interview for a job, it is just a growth and learning opportunity to get a perspective from your boss's boss on the company, their views, vision, right, etc. So you can ask for one of those and use that as the foundation for building your relationship. Okay, next. As you guessed, I'm relatively new. This is a follow on question in a big corporation. There are instances that I know if we do something in a certain way, it would be better, but I struggle to communicate that with my manager. Here's where to use allies. So take your idea and share it with some of your peers. Get their feedback, see what they think. And then, frankly, suggest that they suggest it. Now, you might be saying, well, gosh, if I let them suggest it, then I don't get credit for the idea. You're playing the long game, not the short game. The long game is you want to create allies because at the end of the day, those are the people, your teammates, they're going to support you. They're going to talk about you positively when you're not in the room, etc. So give them the idea. If they like it, I think it's good. Why don't you suggest to them they take it to your boss, right? And many will. And I will tell you, many, when they do that, will say that it actually came from you or that you sparked it. Some won't, but either way, it doesn't matter because now, even if they get full credit for the idea and the idea gets implemented, they know that the idea came from you and you know that the idea came from you. So you now actually have a bond and a relationship. And the next time something happens or you have another idea, you can go to the same person and say, hey, I had this idea. What do you think? Hey, I think that's a good idea. All right, I think I'll take this one forward this time, right? Or why don't we take it forward together, right? Either way. But most, as I said, most people will actually tip their hat to you in the process of sharing the idea. So get some support from peers and then bring ideas forward. And by the way, you can do it together or in a group. Next question. What will be the best way to upgrade/change corporate culture of an organization that has been existing for a long time? Honestly, it depends on your role. If you are a senior leader in the organization, the CEO, then you can change the culture. It will still take years because cultures are embedded. Now, I don't know the size of the company, so let me back up. If your company's over, I don't know, over 100 people, it's going to take a long time, but it can totally be changed. And the reason it's going to take a while is cultures don't just happen. Cultures are not a list of here's what we think is important on the wall. That doesn't make up a culture. A culture is made up by decisions people make every day, by actions people take every day, by how people communicate with each other every day, for what's prioritized and what's not. All of that makes up culture. And so changing culture has to be very intentional. So if you're trying to change culture as a senior leader, you have to be intentional and you have to get everyone at the senior level on board. And then you can start to change it. But you can't really change the culture of an organization as someone who is just part of that organization. Now, you can change the culture of a team or a unit, even within the broader culture, as long as it's not completely opposite. You can't take a culture that is all about, make it up, a culture that's all about accountability, fast, quick, decisive, right, make mistakes, etc., and create within a team or a unit a culture that is one of creation and innovation and thoughtfulness and research and time, and it's just the antithesis, right, of the other. So it has to actually fit and relate to the culture that's already existing in some way. All right, next question's here. Let me just scroll. Okay. Nope, not there. All right. So, oh, here's one. Do I have any tips about working for an egotistical and super competitive bosses? Yes. Stroke their egos. People who feel that it's all about them, right? Well, then fine. Make it all about them, but still get your job done. So if you need help or you need support, always communicate in a way that shows how it's going to bring value to them or bring value to their team or their organization. People who are competitive, try to leverage that for what you're trying to get done. Show how your initiative or your focus or whatever you're working on will help make the team, the group better and more competitive, either in the market or even within the organization. Pardon me. Oh, sorry. But it's all about understanding your boss, what drives them, what motivates them, and then adapting your behavior in many ways to try to figure out how to get done what you need to get done within the context of your manager. And frankly, learning how to work with difficult managers, with challenging managers, with bad bosses, as I said, is actually a skill you need to build because there are no perfect bosses out there. And over the course of your career, you're going to work for a lot of different people. So the more experience you get learning how to do that effectively, the better you will actually be and the more successful you'll have a chance to be. Okay, other questions here. All right, so let me talk about some of the things not to do, right? So one, when you're working with a boss, and these are just general things, right? Don't start a conversation with your boss when you're upset or emotional. Take time to calm down, collect your thoughts, and then talk when you're in a better frame of mind because you don't want to say things that you'll regret later. So it's always better to make sure you get yourself calm, collected, and then have a conversation. Next, don't don't complain. And what I mean by that is because there are going to be issues that you need to raise, but don't be the one that's always throwing problems on your boss's desk. Oh, here's what's wrong. Here's what's broken. Here's the issue. Here's the this. If you have that, make sure you're also coming in with a solution or an approach to make it better. So, for instance, let's say one of the issues you have with your boss is you have meetings, and then after meetings, there's like no follow up. People forget, things don't happen, right? Because there were no minutes, no follow through. Well, instead of walking into your boss and saying, "Listen, right, you're not communicating with us, and you're not following up on stuff that we talked about," instead you can offer to actually do that. You can walk in to say, I think it would be helpful that after our staff meetings, if minutes of the meeting were actually sent out and it was identified who's got what actions. Do you think that would be helpful? And of course, they will say yes. And you can say, great, I can do it the first time. But frankly, you can assign somebody on the team to do this at every meeting so that we take turns in carrying the burden. So that way you're not signing up to be the secretary, if you will, of every meeting. You create it and make the suggestion in a way that it's shared. But that's how to bring a complaint in terms of a suggestion, right? Or an idea. So you want to be seen as the person who's a problem solver. What most bosses want at the end of the day is they want people who work for them who they can count on, who get them the deliverables when they need the deliverables, right? Hit objectives that need to be hit, that help them solve problems, because that's really what the boss's job is, right? Solving problems, that help them solve problems and make their job easier. So if you come into the job with the mindset of how do I make my boss's job easier, that will help you think of these types of approaches. So what else? Your boss is not your mother. And what I mean by that is don't come to them with all the issues with coworkers, or you're having problems working with this group or that all the time. Try to work those things on your own. You can get advice for approaches. For instance, you can ask your boss, you can say, Shellye, what was your suggestion on the best way to work with engineering on trying to get this done? You're not raising a problem, you're not complaining, you're just being proactive to get their advice on the approach. Perfect. Much better than walking in to say, I can't get engineering to do what I need them to do. That's a problem. So you want to make sure that you are working with your coworkers first before you raise issues, and that you're trying, and then you're asking for advice on how to be effective versus complaining. Next. Here's a question. How can we say no to our boss but not create a negative perception? Well, it depends upon what that no is. So if you could just give me a little more context or example, that would be great. But let me just start while you're doing that. It's important to have boundaries, meaning, yes, this is a job, and yes, you have responsibilities, but you're a whole person, so you have other responsibilities too. So if you're constantly being asked, for instance, to go above and beyond, to work late every night, to put in, extra efforts, whatever, on every weekend. If you're the only one in the group that's always being asked to do a certain challenging, like, problem or program that nobody else wants to do, then that's an issue, and you're allowed to set boundaries. So the way you say no is you don't walk in and say, no, I'm not doing this. What you do instead is you say, for instance, let's say it's, I'll call it more overtime, another weekend, right? In terms of being done. What you say is, for the last month, I've done this, this, and this, and this. And I've actually got commitments that I have to take care of in terms of this weekend. Can another member of the team take care of this, right? You're setting boundaries. So without an example, I can't give a better answer than that because I'm not sure what we're saying no to. All right. The other one is, don't ask bosses to solve problems that you could actually do yourself just because you don't want to. If you're the person that's bringing problems to your boss to solve, then you're actually not making their job easier. Remember, I said a boss's job in many ways is just solving problems. So if you can solve it, then solve it. Don't what I call delegate up, because that's seen, it's understood, and it will impact how they view you. So those are some of the don'ts that I would offer. Okay. Any other questions out there? Let me give people a minute to see if they want to throw anything else into the chat box. All right. No? All right. Well, if not, I'll say thank you very much for joining. I did have two questions that were not related to bosses that were left over from the last time. So let me just address those really quickly. Oh, wait. One question just came through. It says, is it a good idea to ignore the fact that you are female senior manager who is surrounded by other male-dominated senior managers and just focus on your own mission? No. You're isolating yourself. And at the end of the day, work is a team sport. And what I mean by work being a team sport is people want employees that work as a team and are part of a team. So if you just kind of stay off in the corner and get done what you need to get done, but you're not interacting much, you're not engaging much, it's going to be hard for you to stand out, and it's going to be hard for you to distinguish yourself, and therefore hard to get promoted. So even if you're in a male-dominated environment, you still need to reach out and establish those relationships. And listen, you're talking to a woman who spent her entire career in a male-dominated environment. I got engaged in the tech industry back in the 80s. When I first started out in sales, in my office, gosh, I think there was one other female salesperson. I have to think. So I've been in your shoes. And what I'll tell you is you still need to learn to build bridges. And you can, but you have to do it your way. So I'm not saying suddenly become them and change your personality, who you are, but you can adapt. And you can, throughout the olive branches, to actually create relationships. And the best way I've found to create relationships and build allies is to actually help other people. So if you have teammates that are working on whatever it is, programs, projects, what have you, ask, hey, is there anything I can do to help? You'd be surprised how those few words can actually help you establish pretty good relationships. So that would be my advice. All right. And in case they're on or listen to this, leftover question from last time is, I'd like to learn how to balance when your spouse tries to give you advice about what you should do for your business. My husband is a graphic designer, and we don't always see eye to eye on my mission, on my vision versus what he wants to do for me. So, what I would tell you here, I'm assuming that your husband is offering you free services for your business. You need to back up. Instead of just giving him, hey, I need you to create X, Y, or Z, that's very tactical. Spend the time and investment to actually take him through. Here's the strategy you've got for the business. Here's the branding you're trying to create. Give him the big picture so that he understands what, therefore, that one thing you're trying to get him to do for you, how that fits. And at the end of the day, that doesn't work and more communications doesn't help, then I would tell you, for the sake of the marriage, hire somebody else to do the graphics. All right. The next one is, we're working on starting up a nonprofit and a subsidiary for-profit to help NGOs work with domestic violence victims and their survivors. So the for-profit business has an application, a tool, kind of like CRM, that's designed to help in these domestic violence scenarios. However, during these times, it's hard to get funding because our clients don't really have a lot of resources. So how do we stay customer funded and gain traction when people don't have the money right now? So what I tell you is, one, if you can afford to defer dollars coming in, then I'd offer your software actually out there as a free trial for X period of time, and pick that X based upon how long you think it takes for companies to truly start to see value from your software. And then when the trial is over, odds are higher, if they're actually using it and getting value, that they'll actually pay for it. So you create low friction up front, but you set a timeline on the trial. It's not a free trial forever. It's a free trial for 3 months, 6 months, whatever that might be. And then if they decide they want to keep it, then they pay you. So that's one way to do it. The other way is, if that still doesn't work, is to try to partner with your clients to apply for grants so that they could get grant money to actually implement your software. I've seen that work too. All right. Well, everyone, that wraps this up. Last questions? That's it. Well, listen, thank you very much for taking the time and tuning in. If you found value in this session, I have a favor to ask. Actually, two. One is comment that it was helpful. And if you happen to be on social media, then on any social media platform, feel free to post just to say, hey, I found Shellye's AMA session helpful. And the reason why I'm asking you to do that is, this phase of my life is all about impact and inspiration. I'm trying to help folks get what they want out of their careers and out of their life by sharing a lot of things that I've learned throughout my career in becoming a CEO and corporate board member. So I'd love more people to know that this opportunity exists so they can tune in and get their questions answered also. And the second one is, I have a book coming out called Unapologetically Ambitious. And if you're so inclined, I'd love a pre-order. It means so much to a new author. The book is basically how to get what you want out of life by being intentional. And I share stories, advice, strategies, and approaches of what worked for me. All right. Thanks very much, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.